Welcome to this pre-recorded lecture where we introduce sport event management. Now, the objectives of this topic are both across the pre-recorded lecture you're watching now and also the separate seminar that we're going to have after this. It's to help you understand what events are and the purpose of sports events, and that's across a combination of kind of international, national, and all the way down to local sports events. And we're going to spend a little bit of time having a look at how we might plan for sports events and the different things we may need to consider. We're going to consider some of the issues with sport event planning, and then we'll start to plan your own sports event, but that won't come in this recorded lecture. That'll be linked to your kind of seminar task beyond this. So in terms of sports events or events generally, I want to get a bit of an understanding as to what events were. So not the most useful starting place, but I thought I'd have a look at the Oxford Dictionary and see how it's defined. And what I found wasn't very helpful. It was something that happens. That's the definition of an event. But if we think about that definition, that can be very broad. So something that happens, an event can therefore be two people kind of meeting and having a social occasion. That's something that happens, so therefore that can be an event. And if you think about something really complicated in an international level, like an Olympic Games, well, that's also an event. So we can think of events at very, very small, low-key things, but also very large international things as well. So as an individual task, you're going to pause it in a moment, but just to set a task for you. The task is, can you identify sports events for each of the following categories? So we've got local, and local is stuff that happens within your local area. So if you've grown up in Plymouth, then think about that as a city, or if you grew up somewhere else, think about a city or town or village that you grew up in. So that would be local. Can you think of sports events that happen locally? I'll give you an example. You can have this one as a starter, but build some more. A sports day at a local school. So that's a local sports event. And then think regionally. And regionally, we can think of county. So Devon, for example, or Cornwall. But we can also think about that as a area of the UK. So we might think about the southwest as a region. So sports events that might happen at kind of county or regional level. And again, I'll give you another one. We'll stick to that theme of schools. And we'll talk about a county competition in a sport of your choice. I'll think about football. I might think about a county football tournament for the secondary schools within the county. Can you think of some more? And in national, quite common sense, stuff that happens nationally across the UK. So we might think about an athletics tournament or something like that, just for the UK, not necessarily within, because that could still be international, but just for UK athletes. Or we might, in football terms, might think about an FA Cup, and then international, obviously stuff that happens across countries, and that could be across countries could be very small, so just a few countries, or it can be very large and involve every country on the planet, e.g. Olympic Games or Paralympic Games. So what I'd like you to do at this point is pause it for 5 minutes. So record the time that you're going to click pause it for 5 minutes, and write down as many as you can think of for each of those 4 categories. And then when you click play after that, I will continue on to the next part of the session. So pause now for 5 minutes, and then click play once your 5 minutes are up. Okay, so on to the next bit. Hopefully you've come up with a number of different events for each of those categories. And what I'd like you to do is bring those with you to the seminar. So whatever you've managed to think of, however you've done that, whether it's on notes or pen and paper, Microsoft Word, whatever it may be, bring that with you to the seminar, so we can kind of have a look at what you've written down across those different sports events, or those different types of sports events. Now, just to introduce events have long played an important role in human society. And we can see some different events there on the left, and they're kind of non-sporty in nature. So festivals and carnivals or have often been used and are still used to break up the tedium of everyday life. And we all, as an excuse for a good celebration, we all like a good celebration. And therefore we kind of like these festivals and carnivals that break up kind of our everyday life. Special events were often historically crucial to the social fabric of day-to-day life. And we can still think about that in kind of modern day and kind of where we are today, in terms of some of the events that we may attend in the UK because they're socially what we do, and the bullet point above around carnivals is a really useful one for thinking about the UK, particularly around towns. And then we can think about other countries. So what kind of events might we think of when we say Germany, for example? And we've got the like Oktoberfest in Germany, for example. And then we might think about the USA or Australia. And we can think of these different events that happen in these countries that are sewn into the kind of social and cultural part of that country, and we can obviously think of those in the UK. But it can be quite difficult to understand the full extent of an event. So the events have huge variety from one event to another. It could be switching on of the Christmas lights, through to a carnival, through to something more national, and the role that they play and how they're run are also all very different. So when we think about events, we might go to some of these bigger kind of festivals and carnivals or sports events that we know, but actually there's a huge variety in events in the UK or even globally or even locally. And in sporting terms, events can be considered to be the lifeblood of sport, with, for example, competitions helping to introduce new participants, increase profits, increase revenues. Sport is built on events, and events could be in a netball, hockey, rugby, football, etc. A match, that's an event. And it could be, if we think about kind of athletics and world championships and Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games, and they're very much bigger, but they're major events. But events happen all of the time in sport, and they are the lifeblood of sport. They bring the money that sport needs. They bring new people from a spectator perspective, from a participant perspective. They increase the profile of the sport. They are the lifeblood of sport. Events are crucial for sport in the UK. So what's the purpose of events? Events require significant contribution by staff and also by volunteers. And therefore, there must be a clear purpose which is clearly understood by all participants. And that's particularly important for events that have a significant number of volunteers, but also by staff as well. So this aim could be generic, it could be long-term, but it should be public, it should be known by people, known by the public, and it should be widely supported. For example, it might be to encourage visitors to come too. It could be to increase revenue streams. It could be to increase participation rates. There could be a number of aims. They could be very generic, very specific. They could have numerical targets. And it could be based on the here and now, or it could be based on medium or long term as well. So a quick task for you, and again, you're going to need to pause it in a moment. So can you find the overarching aim for some of the sports events you previously identified? So previously you identified international, national, regional, local events. Pick any two of those events, any two of your choice. They can both be in the same category if you want. And find the overarching aim for that sport event. And where you're going to bring your list of notes with you. So the different types of events that you thought about or you've identified. Write down the overarching aim next to two of those events, and we'll discuss those in the seminar. So pause it now, however long you need to do that, and then once you click play, again I will continue with the remainder of the lecture. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is event planning. And there's a really useful source here from Watt in 2003. And essentially, what has identified 17 things that we need to do to plan a successful event. And we can think about that in terms of a sport event quite simply. So we can also, they don't all necessarily always happen in this order, but we can view these 17 in an ordered way. So we almost follow this process from 1 down to 17. And a starting point would be to determine the aims and objectives of the event. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? That might be very simple. It might be one person. That might require us to go out to the public and find out what they believe as well. Could be simple or complicated, but we're going to determine the aims and objectives of the event. The next thing we'll do is formulate a policy. So if we've got some aims and objectives, how are we going to achieve that? And are there certain policies that we need within our event in terms of staffing structures or staffing pay, or how we treat volunteers, or salaries, or it might be based around diversity or inclusion. So we're going to formulate, or social media policies. We're going to formulate policies, but the broad policy will be, if these are our aims and objectives, how are we going to achieve that? And then we'll carry out a feasibility study. And again, that varies from simple to complicated. At international tournaments, so, trying to run events to host World Cups or Olympic Games, these feasibility studies are extensive and over a long period of time. But essentially, can we actually achieve what we're aiming to achieve? Is it actually feasible? It might. Once we've done a feasibility study, it might be apparent that it's going to take too much time. It's going to cost too much money. A feasibility study that's really common in kind of the sports landscape is a building of a 3G pitch or a new grass pitch. And then through the feasibility study, we work out actually there's wildlife that live there that we cannot disturb. So there could be a number of things that become apparent for a feasibility study. But essentially, is this actually doable? Once we've carried out that feasibility study, that could be very small, low-key to long and expensive and large kind of feasibility studies. We then make that decision to go ahead. So I know we've come up with some aims and objectives. We've done quite a lot of work here, haven't we? Aims and objectives, the policy, a feasibility study, and we're not actually deciding to go ahead yet until we've done those things. But now we're good to go. So now we've set our course of action, and we're kind of going with it. So we're going to compile a budget. How much money do we need? That might include how we're going to bring some money in. But how much money do we need, and where are we going to spend that? So we might have an overall budget, but we might also break that down to separate budgets. We have a budget for trophies and medals, a budget for facility cost, a budget for parking, etc. So we're going to break that down. We're then going to identify personnel. Who do we need? What skills and experiences do they need? What knowledge do they need? And that will also include kind of how we're going to recruit. So advertisement, where and how, and interviews and stuff like that. We're then going to identify resources. With personnel, we've kind of spoke about human resources, so that's kind of already done to a degree. We spoke a little bit about budgets, but we might also need other resources like equipment or transport, etc. We're then going to identify the requirements of the event. So there might be certain things that we need. Toilets, for example. We might need hotels for people or places to stay. We're then going to break that down to a series of tasks, what actually needs to get done. We can start to divide that out across people once we've done that, but these are all the things that need to be done. Quite a lot so far. We've still got more to go. We're then going to define a structure. So we're going to come up with a staffing structure. So we might break people into different departments or different areas. We might have people who are based on facility, people who are based on the well-being of athletes, or etc. So we're going to define a structure. Who's kind of, we've got our staff, who's kind of doing what. We're then going to communicate that structure to staff, to volunteers, maybe to the wider public, maybe to the participants or the athletes. And we're then going to come up with a detailed plan and timescale where we've come up with the tasks that we need to complete. We've got a structure, we've communicated that, we've got our people in place and our resources and our budgets. We now need to plan who's going to do what and when by. So we're going to kind of plan that detailed list of requirements or plan that we need to create. We're then going to establish and control systems. So it's okay having a plan, but we actually need to be able to monitor that. Are things happening? Are things progressing as we need them to? And if things aren't, we need some way of kind of controlling that as the kind of event planner. So if something's not being done, how do we ensure that that is going to be done? How do we make people accountable? How do we monitor that? How do we then ensure that those things are being done? We then plan the event in terms of the presentation of it, the preparation, the implementation, and also the recovery post-event. And again, that could be simple or complicated depending on the scale of it. So we think about the London 2012 Olympics and the stadium, which was then kind of leased out to a football club. So that's part of the recovery. We then finalise. So we've done it. So we're now going to finalise our accounts. How much did we spend? What have we got left, etc. We then hold the briefing, and then we compile and circulate our final evaluation report. So that's the kind of event planning stages. Now, if you think about a sports team who are potentially playing games once or twice a week, this happens very, very quickly, but it does happen in these stages every single time. So the event planners, and I use the word planners because it's probably a team of people, are working incredibly quickly and incredibly efficiently. And then we think about international competitions that happen every 4 years, like an Olympic Games, and you might only host one every 40 odd years. It still happens very quickly, but clearly not as rapidly as weekly. So more detail, more thought can go into some of these stages. In terms of event requirements, you should identify the precise processes required by identifying all of the requirements for the event, using as many people as possible to broaden ideas. And I've taken a picture of this from a book, so we're not going to talk through all of it, but what we will see is in terms of the way that we might divide people out, or the kind of the different requirements of the event. So we might have like personnel requirements. We might need certain people. We might need car park attendants. We might need announcers. We might need police. We might need photographers, etc. There's a long list there, but who are the different people, the different personnel that our event requires us to have? In terms of finance, again, we might not need all of this, but we might need accountants or people that are going to control our finances. We might need people who are going to sell the product or sell the event. We might need sponsors. We might need to attract sponsorship in. We might need to think about trader stands if we're going to sell merchandise or food and drink. We might need a petty cash, not account, but a kind of money ready in case we need to spend very low sums immediately. We've kind of got that cash ready. Think about health and safety. We might need first aid provision. We might need stewarding. We might need fire precaution, ambulances on site, safety certificates, medical cover. Think about warm-up area facilities. So we need kind of transport to that. We might need marquees. Warm-up not just in terms of athletes going and warming up, but a kind of warm-up to the event. So where people might go. You might walk into a stadium. And that's a kind of warm-up facility because you're not in, you're inside the stadium, but you might not be into the seating area yet. So, for example, this can be quite broad. But if you think about this from a participant perspective, we might need changing rooms, catering facilities. We might need press facilities for the press. We're going to think about waste disposal, car parking, etc. Think about the course or the kind of event itself. We might need policing, we might need disabled access, equipment hire, we might need direction marking, we might need signposting, we might need places for spectators, radio communications, etc. And then in terms of the administration, we need to think about the stationery we need. We might have logos and posters, we might need a timetable, we might need planning documentation, entry and exit procedures, etc. So there's a lot to think about in terms of the event process, and this is a very broad and exhaustive list. You might not think about all these things if you run a very small event, for example, but you can see how much there is to think about, how much there is to do to run a successful event. It's not quick and it's not simple. What we do need to do is put that into some form of time frame or timetable. So, for example, once we've come up with a list of tasks and who's going to do what, we might be able to visualize that. And this is a very broad kind of 8-week, and this isn't everything that will happen in the event, but you'll see across the weeks we start to plan when we're going to do things by. And this is important from an event planner perspective because they can monitor what goes on a week-by-week basis, make sure it's happening, make sure that it's delegated and the right people are doing what needs to be done. So a good event planner will have a hold on all of these things and track it week by week to make sure that these things are actually happening. And in terms of an implementation plan, so then we then need a checklist of kind of what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by, and who's going to do it. So for example, we need to book the venue. The detail in that is kind of we need to confirm the suitability of the venue, we need to fix a date. The timescales we need to do that 18 months ahead, for example, and that's undertaken by the person who's the venue manager. So we've got our list of tasks, our list of things to do down here on the left. And then we kind of work across kind of who's going to do that and when they're going to do that by through our plan. So again, we can control that, we can monitor that and tick those things off as and when they happen. And in terms of a structure of an event planning team, so we can see a structure there on the left. So we've kind of got an organising committee. So it's rarely a person, it's normally a committee. Who then will have an executive director as the kind of most senior person below that committee. And then there might be various people who operate below them. So they're kind of overseeing everything. They're the kind of main event planner. And then we might have managers of the kind of venue, the accommodation, the technical manager, the marketing manager, etc. So that's a typical structure. A B, kind of in the middle, we've got a different structure. So we've still got an organising committee. But instead of an executive director or person, we've now got a subcommittee, an executive subcommittee, and then that will break down to different departments. So like a venue area, a technical area, an accommodation, and people on this committee will take on these various roles and report back to the committee. And then within each of these, we will also have subcommittees. This is a typical volunteer way in the middle, but there could also be a paid employment way as well, but this is typically when events are being run mostly by volunteers. And then C, we've got an organising committee. We break that down to kind of a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary, and other people on the committee. And then down below them, we've kind of got key personnel on specific tasks. So rather than having managers who have people below them or having groups of areas who have subcommittees kind of working on each of these things, we just have people who are responsible for each specific task. So C is kind of a more of a smaller event type structure. So a quick thing for you to think about. What might impact your structure? What might impact the decision between going with A, B or C, or even an alternative structure for the staffing of your event? Pause it at this point, write some ideas down, just pause it for 1 minute, and then I'll give you some suggestions at the end of that. So pause now just for 60 seconds. Okay, hopefully you've written some ideas down, you've come up with some ideas in your head, and you've got some things that might impact the structure of your staffing of your event. Some of the ideas I've come up with, this isn't exhausted, you might have come up with different ideas, but the size of the event, how international down to local, the number of people involved in your event. So that size of the event is really important, and it would determine whether we go with like an A, B or C or something different, but also the size of the organisation. So like the number of staff we have running this event, not just staff, but also the number of volunteers. That will have a huge impact on how we structure our event, because if we've got lots and lots of staff who are paid and experts, we can go with a different structure than if we've got fewer staff or lots of volunteers who can't give that much time. And then the expertise of staff or volunteers, their kind of job remit, the specifications, what skills we have within our staffing structure is also really important to determining what staffing structure we go with. Okay, so before the seminar, we've got a couple of independent study tasks. The first one to do before the seminar, there's going to be an article on Canvas. So it's a journal article. It's going to be relatively heavy reading, so please give yourself a bit of time to do it. It's not something you can do quickly. And the article is Past, Present and Future Major Sport Event Management Practice, the Practitioner Perspective, and it's from Emory in 2010. So this is your independent study task to complete before the seminar. You've then got a broader independent study task. So you've got a multiple choice exam coming up in this module, and you need to start doing some revision for that if you haven't yet, in whatever way suits you. So the content that we discussed, the topics that we've discussed through this module, so if you go back to the module overview document on Canvas, you will see that there's each like kind of session, so there's a lecture and a seminar for each topic, so you get 2 topics per week. You will have a multiple choice exam based upon all of those topics up to that point. So if there are particular topics that you feel quite weak at or less knowledgeable with, you might want to revise back through the lecture and seminar content, and also maybe any independent study tasks or readings that you were set or is on Canvas to develop your knowledge base for that multiple choice exam. So that's kind of an ongoing one. But before the seminar, please make sure you've read the article which is on Canvas.